What happens when the person in charge isn't the right person to lead? In this episode, I'm joined by Dave, former rescue helicopter paramedic turned crisis management consultant. We dive into a real-world scenario where a crisis hit and the usual change of command didn't fit. The line manager wanted to lead the planning, but his subordinate was better suited. Dave made the call. What followed? Tension, ego, and a hard but necessary conversation. This one's all about how in high-pressure moments, rank doesn't always equal capability, ego can't drive the response, and sometimes the right answer comes with pushback. Let's get into it. Welcome to Busting Roadblocks, the podcast where we break down the biggest roadblocks in business and help you clear a path to success. I'm Janet Charteris, your host and the founder of JC Consultancy, where we help businesses remove barriers and unlock their full potential. Today, we get to hear from Dave Greenberg, professional speaker, a rescue helicopter veteran, incident management trainer, COVID-19 incident manager, board of trustee member, and author. I met Dave through a colleague and I follow his insightful posts on LinkedIn, and I just had to get you on, Dave. Welcome.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad you like the LinkedIn stuff. That goes down pretty well.
Now, I know your work experience centers around emergency responsiveness, literally 25 years, heading out on a helicopter on missions to help people in need, and now preparing businesses for crisis. I love it when people find their passion, and even though you're not on the helicopters anymore, you seem to be on another mission and teaching businesses how to prepare. Today, we've got a people management example you're going to talk about. From what you've told me, although specific to crisis management, I think this example has insights in general for people management that I'm intrigued to dig into. So set the scene for us. Where are we and who are we dealing with?
So we're at a government ministry. I was brought in to do SIMS, incident management training for New Zealand government. SIMS training, and help them set up their incident and crisis management teams. People sometimes forget that BAU, business as usual, is not the same as incident management. And what basically happened here is a BAU manager got very put out that a subordinate to him in BAU was made the planning manager for incident management. He didn't like that. He was working for someone that worked for him normally. But what he didn't understand is that the subordinate was someone who just left the military. They had years and years of planning experience, probably the most experienced planning person in the ministry. And they were the ones who were going to be the best to do the planning in an incident. So yep, it's something I've seen. I even experienced the same kind of thing at Ministry of Health.
I bet you did. So I guess amongst other roadblocks, because obviously you're going into an organization full of hierarchy and bureaucracy, and I would say, even though you don't say this about government agencies, politics, because it's a huge organization, your main one is that we're looking at a team hierarchy where the special skill set required are not necessarily aligned with the leader or the official leader that you need for this crisis situation. And like I said, although that's specific to crisis and what you're talking about, I think this whole awareness of what you're good at and knowing where your skill set should be deployed is across the board, because you see it quite often where managers can get a bit defensive when their subordinate is doing something exciting that they'd like to do. So tell me, how did you deal with this? Because that seems like a touchy subject.
Well, we worked on this from two points of view. One was story. I believe that story is the best way to teach. And I've got a lot of years of experience on the helicopter and even before to tell stories about why in SIMS, it's called the controller, is the head of the incident management team, and why they get to pick the best people for the job, regardless of what they do in BAU. And that didn't quite work. And then we just sat down and talked it out. And I said, well, look, as far as I'm concerned, if you don't like it, then you're the one who has to leave the team, which didn't go down well. But sometimes being the consultant is really good because you could say things without
Yep.
long-term implications. And he raised it to his manager, who basically told him to pull his head in.
Yeah.
And I was correct. And this other guy, the new hire, was the best person for the
So did
job.
he just not know a lot about the new hire in terms of that army experience? Is that
He didn't know about it, but more he knew a bit about it, but he didn't care.
okay? He just didn't think
In
it was
his
relevant.
mind, he's the manager. He gets paid more. He's got a higher, better title than this other guy. And so, regardless of the circumstance, the subordinate works to the boss, not the other way around.
Yeah, okay. So I think I briefly talked to you about an example where, and it is still crisis, but during, was it the 2013 Wellington earthquake, the fire warden, and you'd know this because you've probably seen it everywhere. The fire warden is more often than not a PA, an EA, or a receptionist because they're always in the office. Because if you choose too many people at different levels, they're in and out of the office too often to be able to manage this situation. And my friend's EA was the fire warden. The earthquake happened and she bolted. So she had all the training. She was given the position because she was always in the office. So literally location based allocation of quite a key position. And then when he sat down with her afterwards and said, hey, how do you think it went? She had no insight into the fact that her job was to get everyone out of the building and do it in an orderly fashion and, tick all the boxes. She just bolted. So do you find when you go in and you help these companies, there are a lot of people who don't have that insight into themselves and their strengths around handling things like crisis and planning?
Yep, I've often talked about that when an emergency happens, people expect it's the CEO or the manager in the room who's going to stand up and be strong, and sometimes it's the meekest person in the room, the one you would never expect, who just gets a big voice and takes charge and starts leading people, because leaders in crisis are different. And when there's a fire in front of you, or when there's some kind of incident or crisis, it's different. And we try to train this through scenario based training, but even that doesn't always work. But it certainly, if a scenario based training is run right, it gives
Mhm.
people insight.
Yeah.
But giving someone a vest and saying you're now the floor warden and this is what you do is very different to the alarms going off, smoke, self preservation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in your experience, have you seen like personality characteristics that lend themselves to these types of roles?
I've been surprised,
Okay.
because sometimes it's the person you would expect to stand up does, and other times the one that you think would be the best under pressure don't do it well in an emergency, because an emergency, a crisis, is different pressure to the time pressures that the boss needs this or this has to be done or the client's expecting that.
Mhm.
And when the rubber hits the road, as the expression goes, sometimes things do not work out the way people think they will.
And so do you think, so like, because I'm trying to think of if we're translating this back to businesses, right? So to not necessarily crisis management, but
Yeah.
understanding yourself, because sometimes you can do scenario planning in your interview, for example, to go, actually, this person knows how to break down a problem and give us an answer. But most of these people will be highly trained in scenario planning, right? They would have gone and done first aid, for example, gone and done their fire warden training, but that's
Yeah.
not enough. So what's this
Well,
characteristic that's getting people to be all that training, and when the rubber hits the road?
I'm going to use my mom as the prime example. So I started riding the ambulance really young, junior fireman at 13, but I
Wow.
would have been 11 or 12, and my sister cut her lip really badly. and my mom just her job was to calm down my sister, and she went and was smart enough to get a red towel so that it wasn't as apparent how much blood there was, and, was using that to stop the bleeding, and
Yeah.
I was really amazed. My mom just took charge of the situation, whereas my older sister just freaked out. She was, if I was 11, she would have been 14. So never been exposed to the real situation. And I think people who come into any organization, even during BAU, if
Mhm.
they really are high pressure, high risk, um, and we'll stick with high pressure because there isn't a lot of risk in
Yeah.
corporate jobs usually, but pressure brings out some really interesting things. And I do think moms tend to handle stress, that women overall are better at it than men.
Okay.
Um, Certainly not 100%, but we all know people in the workplace who are full of bravado that probably aren't going to be the best ones when this stuff really happens.
Yeah.
But anyone can be trained, I believe, to be able to handle stressful situations or an incident or a crisis. The problem is we don't. We give them a manual, we give them a vest, we give them a hard hat, if it, in the floor warden example, and we say, cool, when this happens, you do this. And then when the alarms go off, all of our emotional triggers happen, and
Yeah.
emotion overrides training in a
Big
lot
time.
of cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I know for me as a professional, emotion was always a backseat to what was in front of us. Like no
yeah.
matter what we were feeling, didn't matter. It was
Yeah.
getting the job done and being very focused. But that was partly I was born with it, and but a lot of it was just trained into it.
And being exposed to it often. Because if you've been doing that
Yeah,
since you're 13, it's
yeah,
astounding, Dave.
yeah. I mean, I saved my first life, or helped save a life, when I was 13. A few days
Wow.
before my 14th birthday, a guy in New York City collapsed on the street, and I got all excited because I had done a CPR course and I knew what to do.
Yeah.
And I went running over, and I put him in the laid him down, and now I'm checking his ABCs. And when I found he didn't have a pulse, my excitement went to horror,
Yeah.
because now this person is relying on me to save their life.
Hmm.
And I started CPR. I was joined by another stranger who was trained in CPR, and we kept the blood going enough that when the paramedics got there with the defibrillator, they shocked him and he lived. And
Yeah.
for me, that was a turning point in my life, helping save a life or helping do whatever it is you're passionate about.
Hmm.
I think will help you overcome any of the other stresses as you move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting you into out of the helicopter and into training into corporate, because this is a totally different environment for you, right? You've gone, I would say, and I'm not saying it is simple, but I would say you get a call, you hop in the helicopter, you go do your thing, right? Now you're
Yeah.
dealing with people who have got egos, as we've already discussed, and have got hierarchy. Um, this won't be the only example where you've had this situation where you're actually like, no, you're not the right person for the job. Is the easiest way always to pull rank from your point of view, or have you got examples of other ways that you've helped people see that their skill set isn't suited for the role that they think they should have?
Yeah, so I teach a bunch of frameworks, and one of them is the size up framework.
Mhm.
And question one is, what's the nature of the situation? And question number two is, who's leading our response? Who in this room is in charge?
Right.
A- And then you start looking at, what do we know to be a fact? What don't we know? But you have to establish who's in charge, and that's either by hierarchy or because this person has been deemed the best person in an emergency or
Mhm.
whatever the situation is. And then they get to call the shots. If they say, Dave, you're the planning manager, end of story, and everyone else could just complain about
Right.
it later.
Yeah.
So one of the things I try to teach is hierarchy isn't the right way to do things for incidents. And when I talk about incidents or crises, we're not always talking about the fire or the
Yeah. Yeah.
flooding. This could be one of your senior leaders in the C suite. It's suddenly arrested for doing something dodgy,
Mhm. Yeah.
and it's now in the paper. You
Yeah.
know,
Now what
that's
do
a
you do?
crisis because
Yeah.
of the reputational risk. And a lot of organizations immediately put the CEO in charge of that crisis, yeah, assuming they're not the one who's been arrested.
Yeah.
But they've got a whole different role. They need to do governance and be strategic.
Mhm.
So they need good operational people who are going to lead the what are our next steps? What statements are we putting out?
Yeah.
Who's contacting key stakeholders? Who's talking to our clients? Because the incident will pass and you still want your business to exist.
Yeah.
And if you don't handle it correctly, then you can put the business at risk. A good example is the Air India crash
Yeah.
in India about a month ago now, 5 weeks ago. That is a crisis. It's a reputational crisis.
Yeah.
People died. It wasn't the CEO who was leading the response. Now the firefighters are doing what they do, but in head office, there was comms, there was PR, there were insurance, who's calling the insurance people.
Yeah.
And now a few days ago came out the information that it looks like one of the pilots turned off a switch to the fuel. And
Mhm.
it's too early to say that's really what happened, but it's looking very much like it.
Yeah.
Um, they better have had some pre-templated stuff ready for that because now, again, reputational and
Yeah.
imagine a lot of people canceling flying with the airline
Yeah.
and everyone wanting seat 11B or whatever it was where the one
Mhm.
survivor came out. But if you're not ready to handle that, if you've never thought about what if our signed vehicle
Yeah.
um, strikes a pedestrian and
Yeah.
on
Right.
Facebook is Dave's Plumbing,
Yeah.
and there's someone, if you've never thought about how we're going to handle that,
Yeah.
it could be a real problem.
Yeah. So I remember in one role where I worked, we were changing the sustainability of a product. And you might think that's not really risky, Janet. Why do you need crisis management for that? But I had worked in a different company and not run the brand that had done something similar. And they had Greenpeace throwing, fake blood over the building and all the rest of it. So I was like, all right, we're doing something that is more sustainable. However, it is not we're angels and we're amazing. It still needs some work before we become a really, we can hang our head up and say we're doing the best for the planet because at the end of the day, you're still eating animals in this case. So I did this full with a PR agency is how I did it. I was like full PR. Here is our matrix of who rings, how many calls are going to trigger this to happen. Thankfully, nothing ever happened, but I absolutely can see the role in it in any organization to go, I need to be prepared for things to go wrong. I think the interesting example is the plumber because they would definitely not have anything. They would be just trying to get the next job so they can keep their team pushing forward.
I often talk at like Chamber of Commerce as of small business groups, and I'm currently developing a product specifically for them with checklists and some video
Right.
instruction because I know as a small business, I wouldn't pay me
No,
to come what I know I'm worth
for the
to
what
come and
if.
do this because it's like insurance. You buy the insurance you could afford at the time and hope for the
Right.
best.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you're trying to decide, do I hire a new person or do I spend money on this? You're going to make the right choice, hopefully, but being prepared for a crisis and being able to respond appropriately, we all have to do it. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, what is a crisis, and what to you in your business might be a huge problem, to me might not be anything.
Yeah.
Or the big cyclone comes through, it's a
Yeah.
crisis for both of us. We all have different challenges in our business, no matter what the size.
Yeah. So I guess we've got two things here. We've got businesses that need to be aware of this, and then we've got people who need to be aware of their role within it and how to play to their
Mhm.
strengths.
Yeah, jumping back to the earlier question about how I handle it. So I'm at Ministry of Health during the pandemic. There was a
Wow.
response, and I was asked to lead this particular response. No one in the room knew me. They knew me as the new guy. I'd been there for a,
5
a
seconds.
month or so.
Yeah.
Um, Luckily, one of the senior leaders of the MOH happened to walk in the room and say, "Oh, great, Dave. I was happy to hear you were leading this," asked their questions, and they left. That gave me all the credibility I needed.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's the boss's role to give the person who is in charge the credibility to be in charge.
Yeah.
And then everyone else just, there were people in this meeting that I was leading that were way more senior than me, both in time at the ministry, working on the pandemic, pay grade in every way, shape, and form. But I was well suited to lead this particular thing.
Right. Right. And so if you could go back and do it again, would you do it the same way?
I I probably, in that example, might have taken 2 minutes to, even I felt like I knew everyone, so I didn't have to do an introduction, but I
Mm-hmm.
probably could have done something to introduce why I was appointed to it. But
Yeah.
more importantly, the person who appointed it to me should have been the one to do the
Yes.
introduction, because they were a more senior person than me. But this was a very busy day, and that
No,
person,
absolutely. Right in the middle of a pandemic.
but yeah, but in the scope of it all, yep, certainly getting the credibility given to you by someone else
Mm-hmm.
who has the credibility, would be a great strategy.
And same for the more junior manager who got the planning role. Would a almost briefing document about everyone's skill set going, hang on, these are reasons.
That, yeah, that I don't know that that would always work, only
Okay.
because sometimes incident teams or crisis teams or assessment teams are put together by who's available right
Right.
now.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to write a document that says, the in a big organization, it might be, nothing's impossible, but no one's going to read it at the time anyway.
No, no,
And
no.
that's the thing. You could have all the plans you want, but it's about performance on the day that really matters.
Yeah. So it sounds like we're even moving more to a general communication discussion as opposed to a self-awareness discussion, because the pressure that you guys are under, you don't get to sit around and go, right, who's good at this? Put your hand up. Yeah, that can be your role. You know what I mean? You've got to go,
Yeah,
right, I'm taking control. And from what I've seen in the 5 minutes that I've met you, you're good at this, you're good at this, you're good at this. If it doesn't work, I'll change you. But we've got to
yeah.
get the response out there.
And that's why question number two is, who's leading our response in my framework? Eh, Everyone's got to understand who's in charge, and their role is to delegate roles. And now some organizations will delegate roles based on your BAU position.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to do it. It's not always the best, but if that
Mm-hmm.
is the way, others will be that the leader will pick, their favorite team. And it's going back to, grade school, where, you're the last one to be picked and you feel horrible.
You get the
Um,
tea.
but yeah, but someone's got to do it, and someone's got to be the leader. And as you just said, a good leader will be able to have the skills to change decisions if they weren't the right ones, or change people if they're not the right people.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed that example, mainly because I think, like, I know, I think we've talked about this. Nothing is as clean and as textbook as you expect. And often in the real life situation, you just have to adapt and make choices. So in general, if you went and told someone in senior management, if you don't like it, tough, you might lose your job. But when it's crisis and you need to make decisions, and they can go and complain to the boss, but some things just have to be made and the calls need to be made. Can you tell us how people can get hold of you now? Because I think hopefully this has triggered some people going, oh yeah, we should probably not put all of our senior management on the same plane when we go away for trips. And they should definitely be in 2 different cars because if we lose them all, we're in trouble. How do they plan for it? So they need a bit of Dave, I think.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they need a bit of Dave. But so I'm on LinkedIn, Dave-Greenberg-speaker, or just go to my website, thedavegreenberg.com, and all my contact details are there.
Yeah, cool. And so I'll put that into the podcast descriptor as well so people can find you immediately. And what are they coming to you? Like, what's your top 3 things they would come to you for? Obviously speaker, because you've got some great stories.
So all my stuff is based around crisis and incident management and high performing teams. So I do training, I do workshops, I do keynote speaking, but they're all under that umbrella of crisis and incident management.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dave, and for sharing your experiences with us. If you have found this podcast valuable, make sure you subscribe and share it with your network. And if you have a business challenge you'd like me to cover, reach out on LinkedIn or at jcconsultancy.co. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What roadblocks are you facing right now?